Traoré didn't send a letter, he didn't call a press conference, he didn't warn anyone. He simply signed the order, and by the time Abuja found out, the audit teams were already on the ground. Nigerian-owned mines across Burkina Faso. Every contract, every financial record, every ton of ore extracted over the last 7 years. All of it under scrutiny, all of it about to be exposed. This was not a routine inspection. This was not a bureaucratic exercise. This was Ibrahim Traoré telling Nigeria's most powerful business elite that the era of operating without accountability was finished. Done. Closed. The phones in Abuja started ringing before sunrise. For decades, Nigerian-owned corporations had expanded across the Sahel's mining sector with the same quiet confidence that colonial companies once moved through African territory. They signed contracts during transitional governments. They paid rates that no international standard would accept. They declared profits that didn't match the convoys leaving the country at night. And nobody said a word. Because nobody dared. Traoré dared. His critics called it reckless. His supporters called it Sankara reborn. But what nobody could deny was that the moment that audit order was signed, the entire political calculation across West Africa changed overnight. Nigeria thought Burkina Faso was manageable. They were wrong. And now the entire continent was about to find out how wrong they were. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Dr. Aminata Diallo had been reviewing mining files for 3 weeks when something stopped her cold. Not a dramatic discovery, not a smoking gun, just numbers that refused to cooperate. Savannah Gold Enterprises, Lagos registered, 3 operational sites in Burkina's eastern provinces. The company's quarterly filings showed modest profits, the kind of numbers that don't draw attention. But the satellite imagery her team had pulled told a completely different story. Round-the-clock operations, dozens of heavy trucks moving material every single day, equipment that costs more per hour to run than this company claimed to earn in a month. She cross-referenced against customs data. Her hands stopped moving. The gold leaving Burkina's borders under Savannah Gold's documentation was worth 10 times what the company had declared. Not twice. Not 3 times, 10 times. She called her deputy Musa into the room. "Look at this," she said, spreading the files across the table. "Every Nigerian-owned operation in this sector has the same clause buried in the contract. Exemption from standard audit procedures. They answer to nobody. Nobody in Burkina, at least." Musa leaned in. Read the fine print carefully, then looked up. This isn't just underreporting. This is organized extraction. They built a system designed to be invisible. Within hours, Aminata was standing in the presidential office with a stack of files that felt heavier than paper should. Traoré listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change dramatically. It simply hardened slowly, the way metal does under sustained heat. When she finished, he asked one question. "How deep does this go?" "Sir, if the patterns across all operations hold, we are looking at billions in lost revenue over 7 years, and the connections don't stop at corporate boards." The licenses for several of these operations were personally approved by officials who are now prominent political figures in Lagos. Traoré walked to the window. Ouagadougou stretched before him, a city sitting on top of wealth that its own people could barely afford to access. He had read about this dynamic. He had heard Sankara describe it in speeches recorded before he was born. He had watched it repeat across the continent for his entire adult life. He turned back. "Prepare a full audit. Every Nigerian-owned mine, every contract, every financial record. I want the documentation so thorough, so precise that no one can claim we fabricated anything. I want transparency to be our weapon." As Aminata left, Traoré made one more call. To his intelligence chief, "I need to know who benefits from these operations in Lagos. Names, positions, political connections, everything." Because he already understood what was coming. The moment this audit became public, Abuja would not respond with silence. The call reached Lagos at 2:47 in the morning. Tinubu's chief of staff, Femi Adamu, recognized the crisis line immediately. He was fully awake before the second sentence was finished. "Sir, Traoré just authorized a full audit of all Nigerian mining operations in Burkina Faso. Our sources say it's comprehensive. They're going after everything. Contracts, financials, production records, everything." Within 90 minutes, the lights were on at Aso Rock. The conference room held faces that rarely appeared together at that hour. Cabinet ministers, intelligence directors, and representatives from Nigeria's largest mining conglomerates, men whose companies had operated in the Sahel for years on the quiet understanding that certain questions would never be asked. Tinubu entered last. "Tell me this is a misunderstanding," he said. Adamu shook his head. "It's deliberate, sir. They have documentation. Our companies are exposed." One mining executive leaned forward. "Mr. President, if they publish those results, it's not just about money, it's about precedent. If Burkina can audit Nigerian operations, what stops Mali? What stops Niger? We've spent decades building these networks across the Sahel. One audit could unravel all of it. What is our actual exposure? Tinubu asked. The room went quiet, then Adamu spoke. Sir, our legal team estimates that if Burkina enforces standard taxation retroactively, the claims could exceed $3 billion. And several of these contracts carry irregularities that go beyond standard business disputes. Irregularities? Tinubu repeated. The contracts were signed during transitional periods, sir. Some officials who approved them are now sitting on our advisory boards. If Traoré connects those dots publicly, this becomes a corruption scandal that touches your administration directly. That is where the real problem began. Nigeria's mining footprint in Burkina was not just business. It was political infrastructure. The licensing approvals, the exemption clauses, the deliberately undervalued extraction rates. These weren't accidents, they were architecture, built carefully over years, by people who expected it to stand forever. Traoré had just put a wrecking ball through the foundation. The foreign minister cleared his throat. We can mobilize ECOWAS. Frame this as an attack on regional economic integration. Nigeria has significant leverage within the institution, do we? The intelligence chief cut in. Traoré expelled French forces. He's aligned with Mali and Niger. His domestic approval rating sits above 80%. He is not afraid of isolation. He may actually welcome it. Tinubu was quiet for a long moment. Prepare a response strategy. Keep it quiet. No public statements until we know exactly what they have. As the meeting dispersed, Adamu pulled him aside. Sir, our intelligence indicates Traoré has already begun feeding information to Pan-African media. He's building the narrative before we can respond. Tinubu's jaw tightened. This was not just an audit. This was a precision strike. Traoré wasn't trying to recover money. He was trying to redefine the rules of engagement between African nations. And he had chosen Nigeria as the example, the largest economy on the continent, the regional heavyweight, the country that expected deference. That was the calculation, and it was working. By dawn, Ouagadougou was already moving. Street vendors discussed the audit over morning tea. University students crowded around lecture hall screens. Farmers in remote villages caught fragments on transistor radios. Social media erupted in a language that was not policy or economics, it was memory. Sankara's name appeared in thousands of posts alongside Traoré's. The feeling was not just political support, it was recognition. Someone was finally saying what people had known for years. Outside the presidential palace, crowds gathered with handwritten signs. Our resources, our future. Sankara's dream lives. Africa is not for sale. This was not a demonstration organized by a political party. This was a population that felt seen. Inside, Colonel Ouagadougou stood beside Traoré watching the crowds. The people are with you, Mr. President. But Abuja is preparing to push back hard. Let them, Traoré said. What are they going to do? Invade? Sanction a country they depend on for stability? Nigeria needs Burkina's peace as much as we need anything from them. Aminata entered with updated field reports. Mr. President, the audit teams have started physical inspections. What they're finding on the ground is worse than the documents suggested. Some Nigerian operations have been extracting ore from sites not even listed in their official contracts, operating in areas they have no legal authorization to touch. Document everything, Traoré said. Photographs, GPS coordinates, worker testimonies. I want evidence so overwhelming there is no room for denial. Sir, Aminata added carefully, we have also identified the beneficial owners behind 3 of the largest operations. Direct ties to prominent Lagos politicians. One company has board members who served in Tinubu's cabinet. That was the moment the audit became something else entirely. This was no longer a dispute between Burkina Faso and Nigerian corporations. This was a direct line between resource extraction and political power in Nigeria's highest offices. Traoré wasn't auditing companies, he was auditing a system, and the system had names attached to it. Prepare the full report, he said, but hold those names for now. Ouagadougou spoke quietly. Mr. President, you understand this path has no return point. Traoré nodded. That is exactly the point. 3 weeks in, the findings were no longer shocking, they were devastating. Aminata presented the complete picture to Traoré and his full cabinet in a secured room. What she laid out was not a series of violations. It was a portrait of deliberate, sustained, systematic theft. Savannah Gold had declared extracting 12 tons of gold between 2018 and 2024. Export documentation showed 43 tons leaving under their paperwork, 31 tons unaccounted for. Simply gone. Emerald Valley had secured their mining rights at $2 per ton. The international standard is $25. The official who approved that contract was now serving as a special advisor in Tinubu's administration. Horizon Mineral Group had repatriated 90% of profits to Lagos. Burkina's mining code required 70% reinvestment locally. They had ignored it entirely, every year, without consequence. Conservative revenue loss estimate, $4.2 billion across 7 years. The room went silent when that figure appeared. That was nearly half of Burkina Faso's annual national budget. Hospitals not built, schools not funded, roads not paved, not because the money didn't exist, because it existed and it left. How do we proceed, the Justice Minister asked. We make every major finding independently verifiable, Traoré answered. Third-party confirmation. International auditing firms, not our word against Nigeria's. Evidence so solid it can survive any political challenge they throw at it. His foreign minister nodded. Ghana's president reached out yesterday. Very diplomatic, very careful. But the message was clear. Nigeria is nervous and it is starting to spread. Traoré looked around the room. Here is what Nigeria does not understand. This was never about them. It was about whether Burkina Faso will govern itself. If that makes a regional power uncomfortable, then perhaps that power needs to examine why it expected us to stay silent. And then the Accra summit happened. 15 nations, 1 room, and 2 men representing a collision that had been building for months. The Nigerian foreign minister, Bakari, spoke first. Compelling. Measured. He presented data on Nigerian investment in the Sahel, job creation numbers, infrastructure funding. He framed the audit as a targeted campaign against legitimate business, a threat to regional economic integration, a precedent that would chill investment across West Africa. The audience was receptive. Nigeria had allies in that room, countries that depended on Lagos diplomatically, financially, institutionally. Then Traoré requested the floor. Minister Bakari presents a compelling picture, he began quietly. So let me show you what that picture looks like from inside Burkina Faso. He distributed folders to each delegation. Savannah Gold declared 12 tons of gold extracted. Export records show 43 tons leaving under their documentation. I invite every delegation in this room to explain where the remaining 31 tons came from. The room shifted. Emerald Valley paid $2 per ton for mineral rights in our territory. The international standard is $25. That discount was approved by an official who now works inside the current Nigerian administration. Bakari tried to interrupt. These are serious allegations. Traoré cut him cleanly. They are not allegations, they are documented facts verified by independent international firms. We invited Nigerian officials to review our methodology before this summit. They declined. He turned to address the full assembly. For decades, more powerful nations in our region have operated inside weaker ones on terms that would never be accepted if applied in reverse. They invest, yes, but on terms designed to guarantee that the investor profits and the host nation loses. And when someone raises a question about this, we are told we are endangering cooperation. He paused. Sankara said, the one who feeds you controls your thinking. But Nigeria is not feeding Burkina Faso. They are feeding themselves from our table and calling it aid. A video began playing on the screen behind him. Workers from Burkina's mining regions, real people, describing production figures that never matched what the companies filed. Safety violations dismissed without investigation. Communities living beside mining operations with no clean water. Environmental contamination being denied by corporate spokespeople who were never asked to show evidence. When the video ended, the silence was the loudest thing in the room. That evening, the 2 men met privately. Just Traoré and Tinubu. No delegations, no cameras. You've embarrassed my administration before every regional leader on this continent, Tinubu said. Traoré didn't look away. Fair compensation for our resources, independent oversight of all future operations, and a guarantee that the connections we've documented are severed. Those are my terms. And if I can't give you that, then the full audit becomes public. Every name, every figure, every contract. And we let African people decide who is right. Tinubu leaned back. You're playing a dangerous game. There are limits to how far you can push this. We both know how Sankara's story ended. Traoré's expression didn't change. Times have changed. You cannot make me disappear without the world watching. And even if you could, the evidence is already in too many hands. They sat in silence. 2 men. 2 different ideas about what Africa is supposed to be. One built on a regional hierarchy where the largest economy sets the terms and smaller nations adapt. The other built on the belief that sovereignty doesn't scale with GDP. Tinubu stood. We'll continue through diplomatic channels, but understand this. You've started something with consequences beyond what you can control. As he left, Traoré remained seated. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But he had also shown something to every government watching, that it was possible, that you could look a regional giant in the eye and not blink. 2 weeks after Accra, the documents leaked. Every finding, every corporate filing, every ownership structure, every political connection. It hit Pan-African media simultaneously, as if released from multiple sources at once. Within hours it was everywhere. Social media, international press, every capital on the continent. The most damaging piece was a single email from 2022. Internal communication between a Nigerian mining executive and a government official. It read, "The transitional administration is weak and needs Nigerian support. This is our opportunity to lock in 20-year licenses before a permanent government starts asking difficult questions." Nigeria's response was immediate, out of context. Disinformation. Fabricated to damage Nigeria's reputation, Bakari held a press conference and called it a coordinated attack on regional cooperation. But the denials didn't hold. International outlets picked up the story. Investigative journalists cross-referenced the documents against public records, everything verified. Back in Lagos, Tinubu faced something he hadn't anticipated. Not just diplomatic pressure, domestic crisis. Opposition lawmakers demanded answers in the National Assembly. Nigerian citizens who had nothing to do with mining operations felt the public humiliation of their country being exposed as a regional exploiter. The story had moved beyond Burkina Faso. It had become a conversation about Nigeria's identity and role in Africa. Inside a SOROC, one minister proposed what everyone knew was inevitable. "We acknowledge that some Nigerian companies operated improperly. We announce a bilateral commission. We negotiate compensation. We reframe this as corporate misconduct, not government policy." It was damage control, but it was also an admission, and it came too late to control the narrative. In Ouagadougou, Aminata called Traoré. The leak accomplished what we needed. But the hardest part is coming now. Nigeria doesn't forget. "I know," he said, but Sankara said, "You cannot kill ideas. This idea is already out there." African nations auditing foreign operations, demanding accountability, refusing to accept exploitation dressed as investment. Even if they come after everything I've built, that idea survives. 3 months later, something unexpected happened. Nigeria and Burkina Faso signed a bilateral agreement. Nigerian companies operating in Burkina would pay $2.1 billion in back taxes and financial penalties. All new contracts would be restructured to meet international standards. An independent oversight body would monitor future operations. But the real shift wasn't in the figures. Mali announced similar audit procedures for foreign mining operations. Niger followed. Ghana quietly began reviewing regional mineral contracts it had never publicly questioned before. In boardrooms across West Africa, lawyers were suddenly being asked to review arrangements that had seemed permanent for decades. Traoré addressed a crowd in Ouagadougou. "Today we did not just recover stolen wealth. We recovered our dignity. We proved that sovereignty is not something you ask permission for. That accountability is not optional because a more powerful neighbor finds it inconvenient." The crowd responded with a sound that moved across the city like weather. But Traoré knew what the celebration couldn't erase. Forces that lost billions from this outcome would not accept it quietly. The same networks that built that system still existed. They had simply been forced into a different shape. That evening, Aminata arrived with new correspondent, Mr. President. Civil society organizations across West Africa are requesting documentation of our audit process. They want to understand how we built the evidence, how we secured independent verification, how we survived the pressure. Traoré nodded. "Share everything. If other nations want to hold foreign operations accountable, give them the blueprint." That was always the real point. Safadogo entered. "Intelligence reports indicate elevated threat activity, sir. Those who lost the most will not treat this as settled." "I know," Traoré said quietly. He stood at the window looking out over the city. "But I would rather stand for one day than kneel for a lifetime." Sankara understood that. Maybe this time the ending is different. Maybe this time enough people are watching that the cost of silence becomes greater than the cost of truth. Outside in the streets, young people chanted two names together, Sankara and Traoré. A generation that had grown up watching the continent's wealth leave through invisible channels and official paperwork was now watching something different. A leader who read the contracts, found the discrepancies, built the case, and refused to back down. The audit had been about mines, about money, about contracts signed in bad faith by officials who never expected to face consequences. But it became something larger than all of that. It became proof that the Sahel was no longer manageable territory for external interests or regional powers operating without accountability. That documents could be weapons when the people holding them refused to be intimidated. And in capitals far beyond West Africa, in boardrooms where decisions were made about which African governments were cooperative and which ones needed to be handled, something had shifted in the calculation. But that shift created a new problem, and it came from a direction nobody had fully anticipated. Within weeks of the bilateral agreement being signed, a different kind of pressure began to build. Not from Nigeria this time, from outside the continent entirely. Western financial institutions that had long maintained relationships with the Nigerian mining conglomerates started making quiet inquiries. The World Bank's regional office released a carefully worded statement expressing concern about what it called investment uncertainty in the Sahel corridor. The language was diplomatic, but the message underneath was so subtle. Burkina Faso was being warned that its audit precedent was making foreign investors nervous. Traoré read the statement and set it down without changing his expression. Investment uncertainty, he repeated to his cabinet. They are telling us that exposing theft creates uncertainty. Think about what that sentence means. It means the system depends on the theft continuing. When you stop it, the system calls that instability. That framing spread fast. Pan-African media picked it up immediately. Commentators across the continent pointed to the World Bank statement as confirmation of something many had argued for years, that international financial institutions did not exist to serve African development. They existed to protect the conditions that made African wealth extractable. The debate that followed was louder than anything the audit itself had produced. In South Africa, Julius Malema addressed a crowd in Johannesburg. He held up a printed copy of the World Bank statement and tore it in half. He said what Traoré did in Burkina is what every African government should be doing right now. And the fact that Washington is nervous about it tells you everything about whose side those institutions are really on. The clip circulated for days. In Kigali, Kagame gave a more measured response in a televised interview. He acknowledged the complexity of regional investment relationships while making clear that sovereignty over natural resources was not a negotiable principle. He stopped short of endorsing Traoré's methods directly, but he did not condemn them. And in the diplomatic language of African politics, that silence on condemnation spoke clearly. ECOWAS found itself paralyzed. Nigeria pushed for a formal resolution framing the audit as a violation of regional economic agreements. But enough member states either abstained or signaled quiet support for Burkina that the resolution stalled. The institution that Nigeria had counted on as its diplomatic instrument simply could not be moved in this direction. Too many governments were watching their own mining sectors and thinking about their own numbers. That was not something Nigeria had prepared for. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré received a delegation he had not expected. Representatives from 3 Sahel civil society networks arrived with a request. They wanted Burkina's Transparency Commission to help establish a continental resource monitoring framework, not a government institution, not an AU body. A citizen-led independent mechanism that could track extraction data across borders and flag discrepancies before they became 7-year-long financial hemorrhages. Aminata met with them for 6 hours. When she briefed Traoré that evening, she was direct. Sir, what they are proposing is bigger than what we did. We audited one sector in one country. They want to build the infrastructure to make this impossible to hide anywhere on the continent, permanently. Traoré was quiet for a long moment. What do they need from us? Data, methodology, and your public endorsement. Your name still carries weight in a way that institutional backing cannot replicate right now. He agreed without hesitation. That decision mattered more than almost anything else that came from the audit process, because it signaled that Traoré understood something that purely political leaders often miss. Individual confrontations are temporary, systems are permanent. The goal was never just to win one fight against one regional power. The goal was to make the fight unnecessary in the future by making concealment structurally impossible. The Continental Resource Monitoring Network began its work quietly, without a formal launch, without a press conference, without the kind of announcement that draws hostile attention before the foundation is even built. But those who needed to know about it knew. And those who had the most to lose from transparency already understood what it meant. Africa was not just checking the receipts from the past. It was building the accounting system for the future. And that was something that could not be undone by diplomatic pressure, financial warnings, or the weight of regional institutions aligned with the old order. The question was no longer whether African nations would demand accountability for their resources. That question had been answered in Ouagadougou. The question now was whether the systems being built to enforce that accountability could survive what was coming next. Because what was coming next would not look like a diplomatic dispute or a summit confrontation or a bilateral agreement. It would look like something quieter and far more dangerous. The people celebrating in the streets of Ouagadougou understood the victory. What they could not yet see was the room where the response was already being planned. The faces around that table were not in Lagos, they were not in Paris, they were in places with no public connection to African mining at all. That is how these things work. That is how they have always worked. And that is exactly why what Traoré built next had to be stronger than what he had already proven. Africa was watching, and for the first time in a very long time, the people doing the watching understood that they were not spectators. They were participants in a struggle that had never really stopped. It had only changed its language and updated its paperwork. The era of easy extraction was afraid, but afraid is not the same as finished. That distinction would define everything that came next.